Hello and welcome to this video where I talk to you about the key themes of Romeo and Juliet. Okay, um, so let's just kind of outline them quickly. The ones that you're generally going to come across. So the first is obviously love, and in that we're obviously thinking about love as a kind of powerful force. We're thinking about the way that love contributes to passion. And is a kind of quite influential thing. We're obviously thinking about fate versus free will, and specifically the way that guides humanity. Um, we're thinking about violence, that classic of Romeo and Juliet, violence, and the way that how destructive violence can be, but also, I guess, the way that violence links to the youth. Um, we're thinking about family, and in that, I guess, patriarchy and certain expectations that exist there too. Um, we're thinking about, last but not least, I guess, death and the way that death acts as an escape. The next thing to consider always, once we've got our themes, is the message. So what is Shakespeare saying through love? Well, he's saying, obviously, that love is kind of all-consuming, an all-consuming force, and that the passion that leads to love can actually lead to negative consequences. Love makes us act in strange and even foolish ways. Okay, and you see that throughout the play, but most presciently through our titular characters, Romeo and Juliet. So if you're writing about love, it's likely you're writing about Romeo and Juliet. Just to add in there as well, we can also talk about more platonic loves. We could obviously talk about the love between Romeo and Mercutio. You could talk about parental love and talk about Lady and Lord Capulet and Juliet, and the way that even these kinds of love can make us act in strange ways too. Fate versus free will, the message there is fairly clear, I think, that our lives are sort of dictated for us. And this is obviously a reflection of Elizabethan society, that Shakespeare was living in. He was seeing this adherence towards fate. But I guess underneath it is that, I guess it's sort of, where does free will begin? Where does free will begin? When Romeo kills Tybalt, is that fate or is that free will? He thinks it's fate. He says fortunes fall. But of course, as an audience, are we not meant to think, well, you were the one who did it. You were the one who picked up the weapon. Right, violence. Now, violence, I guess, in some way links to another theme, which is honor. And really that, like, unchecked honor leads to violence, and violence leads to destruction, even for the innocent. The best example of that, and similarly to youth as well, is of course Mercutio and his plague on both your houses. He is neither House Capulet nor Montague, and yet he dies as a consequence of their feud. When we're thinking about family, we're thinking really, again, about loyalty to the family. Where does it start? Where does it end? Now, we're looking at patriarchal societies, men in dominant positions, men in controlling positions. Best example, obviously, is Lord Capulet. And the expectations, for example, on Juliet, is that she will marry who he says she will. However, when she says no, all of this starts to come up again, and it causes great consternation and great chaos. So the message really for family, I think, from Shakespeare is be willing to be independent, okay, but understand the consequences, okay, which may be upsetting your family, right? And last but not least, death. Well, I would say that the message really, in some ways, is death is not the end. Okay, as in it may well be the end of your life, but it's not the end of the story. You know, we see the ancient grudge break to a new mutiny, you know, and a common understanding that comes through death. Romeo and Juliet's life will continue, we would assume, in heaven, and that's why to them it is a noble escape because they have somewhere to be. I hope you enjoyed that brief coverage of the themes of Romeo and Juliet.